Family celebrates too early. Steve Harvey sees something no one noticed. Most people look at a celebration and see joy. They see the jumping, the screaming, the hugging, the tears of happiness. They see a family that just won and assume that everyone in that family is winning. But Steve Harvey has spent over a decade watching families on his stage, and he has learned something that most people never learn. He has learned to watch the person who is not celebrating. The one standing still while everyone else is moving. The one whose smile does not match their eyes. The one who is physically present but emotionally somewhere else entirely. On a Thursday afternoon in April 2025, the Morrison family won fast money on Family Feud. They hit 200 points. The confetti dropped. The family exploded in celebration. Every single person in that studio was on their feet, clapping and cheering. Every single person except Steve Harvey. Because while the rest of the world was watching a family celebrate, Steve Harvey was watching the one member of that family who was not celebrating at all. And what he saw, what nobody else in that building noticed, would turn the greatest moment of this family's life into the most important conversation they had ever had. Before we get into this, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel right now. What Steve Harvey noticed about this family is something you need to hear, because there might be someone in your own life right now who is standing still while everyone else celebrates, and you have not seen them yet. The Morrison family from Indianapolis, Indiana walked onto the Family Feud stage like a family that had been waiting their whole lives for this moment. Their matching teal shirts were bright and fresh. Their energy was explosive. They clapped when the audience clapped. They cheered when Steve Harvey walked out. They radiated the kind of big, warm, Midwestern enthusiasm that made you want to root for them before the first question was even asked. They looked like the happiest family in America. And in many ways, they were. But happiness in a family is never as simple as it looks from the outside, and the Morrison family was no exception. The family captain was a woman named Denise Morrison. She was 51 years old, a veteran high school guidance counselor who had spent 23 years helping teenagers navigate the space between who they were and who they were becoming. Denise was the engine of the Morrison family. She organized everything, drove everything, powered everything. She was the one who had applied to Family Feud, the one who had coordinated the travel, the one who had ordered the matching shirts and booked the hotel and made the itinerary and packed the snacks for the road trip from Indianapolis to Atlanta. Denise operated at a frequency that most people could not sustain for a week, let alone a lifetime, and she did it because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling, and feeling meant confronting things she was not ready to confront. Standing next to Denise was her husband, Robert, who was 53 and worked as a facilities manager at a university in Indianapolis. Robert was Denise's opposite in almost every way. Where Denise was movement, Robert was stillness. Where Denise filled every silence with words and plans and activity, Robert sat in the silence comfortably, letting it exist without trying to fix it. He was the family's anchor, the steady, reliable presence that everyone leaned on without fully appreciating because steady and reliable were not qualities that announced themselves. Robert loved his family fiercely, but he expressed that love in ways that were easy to overlook. He showed up. He listened. He stayed. The third member of the team was the Morrisons' oldest child, their son Terrence, who was 27 and worked as a marketing analyst at a tech firm in Chicago. Terrence was the family's golden child, the one who had done everything right. Straight A student, college scholarship, good job, nice apartment. He called his mother every Sunday and his father every Wednesday, and he came home for every holiday without fail. Terrence was confident, articulate, and comfortable in the spotlight, and he was the one Steve Harvey gravitated toward during the pre-game introductions because Terrence had the easy charisma of someone who had never had to fight for attention. It came to him naturally, the way sunlight comes through a window. The fourth member was the Morrisons' middle child, their daughter Brianna, who was 24 and worked as a veterinary technician. Brianna was the family's heart, the one who felt everything deeply and cared about every living thing she encountered. She had inherited her father's quiet nature but not his comfort with silence. Brianna's quietness was different. It was the quietness of a person who had a lot to say but had learned, somewhere along the way, that the room was usually too full of other people's voices for hers to be heard. She was kind, thoughtful, and perpetually overshadowed, not by cruelty or intention, but by the simple mathematics of a family with a mother who organized everything and a brother who excelled at everything. There was not always enough space left for the person in the middle. And then there was the fifth member. The one Steve Harvey would notice, the one nobody else noticed. His name was Marcus Morrison. He was 21 years old. He was the baby of the family, the youngest child, and he was standing at the far end of the podium in a teal shirt that fit him perfectly and a posture that did not fit anything at all. Marcus was not smiling the way his family was smiling. He was performing a smile, the kind that used the correct muscles but did not reach the correct places. His eyes were not connecting with the audience or the cameras or even his family. They were focused on a middle distance that existed somewhere between the stage and whatever was happening inside his head. His hands were in his pockets, not casually, but deliberately, as if he was holding himself still from the inside. Marcus was a junior at Indiana University, studying biology. He had been a strong student in high school, a quiet but reliable presence in the Morrison household, the kind of kid who did his homework without being asked and never caused problems and never demanded attention and never made waves. He was easy. That was the word his parents used. Marcus was the easy one. Terrence was the ambitious one. Brianna was the sensitive one, and Marcus was the easy one, the one who did not need extra help, the one who did not need checking on. The one who was fine. Except Marcus was not fine. He had not been fine for over a year. He had been struggling at school, not academically, but socially. He had lost his friend group after a falling out during sophomore year that he had never fully explained to anyone. He had been spending most of his time alone in his dorm room, skipping meals, missing classes he used to enjoy, and sleeping 12 and 14 hours at a stretch. He had stopped calling home as often, and when he did call, he kept the conversations short and surface level, telling his parents everything was great and hanging up before anyone could ask a follow-up question. He was disappearing in plain sight, the way quiet people disappear when the people around them are too busy being loud to notice the silence growing. Nobody in the Morrison family knew the extent of what Marcus was going through. Denise had noticed that his calls were shorter but attributed it to typical college busyness. Robert had sensed something during Marcus's last visit home, a flatness in his son's affect that nagged at him, but he had not pushed. Terrence was in Chicago, connected to his younger brother primarily through group text messages that Marcus rarely contributed to. And Brianna, who might have noticed because she understood what it felt like to be overlooked, had been consumed by the demands of her own life and her own quiet struggles with being the middle child who never quite got enough attention. The family loved Marcus. Nobody questioned that, but love without attention is like water without a glass. It exists, but it has nowhere to go. The Morrison family was facing off against the Gutierrez family from Fort Worth, Texas. The Gutierrezes were a vibrant, competitive family who brought tremendous energy to the stage. Both families were excited and ready to play. Steve Harvey came out and worked the room, trading jokes with Denise, who was quick-witted and sharp, and spending a moment with Terrence, whose natural charm made for easy television. Steve greeted each member of the family as he moved down the line. When he reached Marcus at the end, he shook the young man's hand and said, "Hey, young man, you ready to play?" Marcus nodded and said, "Yes, sir." 2 words, no elaboration, no smile. Steve moved on, but something registered behind Steve's eyes the way a slight anomaly registers on a radar screen. Not an alarm, just a blip, a note, something to come back to if it showed up again. The game was strong. Denise was a force at the podium, giving quick, confident answers that kept the Morrison family in the lead. Robert contributed steady, thoughtful responses that showed the careful mind of a man who considered every angle before committing. Terrence was electric, delivering top answers with the flair of someone who thrived under pressure. Brianna surprised everyone with a #1 answer in the 3rd round that made the audience erupt, and for a brief, beautiful moment, she glowed with the kind of attention she rarely received. Denise hugged her and said, "That is my girl." Brianna's face lit up in a way that told you how much those 4 words meant and how infrequently she heard them. Marcus answered one question during the main game. His answer was correct. He gave it quietly, returned to his spot at the end of the line, and put his hands back in his pockets. Nobody commented. Nobody celebrated his contribution. The family was too focused on the game, too caught up in the energy, too absorbed in the momentum to register that one of their own had just participated and received no recognition at all. It was not intentional. It was not malicious. It was the kind of oversight that happens in families where one person has learned to be so invisible that their presence stops generating a response. Steve Harvey noticed. He was watching the board when Marcus gave his answer, but when he turned back and saw Marcus walk silently to the end of the line without a single member of his family acknowledging his contribution, something clicked in Steve's mind. The blip from earlier became louder. Steve's eyes tracked Marcus for the rest of the round, and what he saw confirmed what his instincts had been telling him. Marcus was not engaged. He was present in body but absent in every other way. He clapped when his family scored, but the clapping was mechanical. He smiled when the audience cheered, but the smile was a mask that kept slipping. And his eyes, when they were not performing for the cameras, had a quality that Steve Harvey recognized because he had seen it in his own mirror during the darkest years of his life. They were the eyes of someone who was wondering whether anyone would notice if he simply was not there. The Morrison family won the main game and advanced to fast money. The family erupted in celebration. Denise was jumping, Robert was clapping, Terrence pumped his fist, Brianna was laughing, and Marcus stood at the end of the line and watched his family celebrate with an expression that was not joy and was not sadness and was not anger. It was something worse than any of those. It was resignation. The quiet acceptance of someone who had concluded that their absence from this moment would not change it. Terrence and Denise played fast money. Terrence went first, scoring an exceptional 112 points. Then Denise stepped up, and with the precision and confidence that defined everything she did, she added 91 points. The total was 203. They had won the $20,000. The board lit up. The confetti cannon fired, music blasted through the studio. The Morrison family collided in a group hug at center stage. Denise was screaming. Robert was lifting Terrence off the ground. Brianna was jumping up and down. Confetti rained down on all of them in a shower of color and noise and celebration. And Marcus was standing exactly where he had been standing for the entire game. At the end of the line, hands in his pockets, 5 feet from his celebrating family, alone in a room full of 200 cheering people. Nobody noticed. Not Denise, who was too consumed by the victory. Not Robert, who was focused on Terrence. Not Terrence, who was being lifted off the ground. Not Brianna, who was finally part of the center of something. Nobody in the audience noticed because the confetti and the music and the celebration were too bright and too loud for anyone to see the shadow standing at the edge of it. Nobody noticed except Steve Harvey. Steve was standing at his podium and he was not celebrating. He was not clapping. He was not reacting to the score or the confetti or the music. He was looking at Marcus Morrison. He was looking at a 21-year-old boy standing 5 feet from his family and 1,000 miles from their joy. And in Steve Harvey's face was the look of a man who had just seen something that made the confetti and the music and the $20,000 completely irrelevant. Steve raised his hand. He signaled to the production booth. The music stopped. The confetti stopped. The family's celebration slowed as they sensed the change in energy, turning toward Steve with confused expressions. The audience quieted, and Steve Harvey did something that nobody in the studio, from the producers in the booth to the cameramen on the floor, understood yet. "Hold on," Steve said. His voice was calm but carried the unmistakable weight of a man who was about to change the direction of everything. "Hold on. Before we wrap this up, I need to do something. I need everyone to look at something that I just saw, something that nobody else in this building saw. And I need the Morrison family to see it most of all." Steve Harvey walked away from his podium and moved to the spot where Marcus was standing. The family watched with confused expressions. Denise took a step toward them, but Steve held up his hand gently, asking her to stay where she was. He stopped in front of Marcus and looked at him, really looked at him, with the full, undivided attention of a man who understood what he was seeing because he had been what he was seeing. "Marcus," Steve said, and his voice was low enough that the audience had to lean forward to hear it. "Your family just won $20,000. Confetti came down from the ceiling. Music played, your mother was screaming, your brother was in the air, your sister was jumping, and you did not move." Steve paused. "You stood right here in this exact spot with your hands in your pockets and you watched your family celebrate without you, and none of them noticed." The words landed on the stage like something heavy dropped from a great height. Denise's face changed. The celebration was gone, replaced by the expression of a woman who had just been told something about her family that she should have already known. Robert went still. Terrence looked at his younger brother as if seeing him for the first time that day. Brianna's hand went to her mouth. Marcus did not respond. He stood in front of Steve Harvey with his hands still in his pockets and his eyes fixed on the floor, and the mask he had been wearing all day, the one that had allowed him to stand on a game show stage and perform the minimum required level of participation without anyone questioning whether he was okay, began to crack. "I have been watching you all day," Steve said. "I have been watching you since the moment you walked onto this stage. You gave one answer during the entire game. It was correct. Nobody in your family said a word to you about it. You clapped when they scored, but your hands were going through the motions. You smiled when the cameras were on you, but the smile stopped the second they looked away. And just now, during the biggest moment of your family's day, you stood here alone." Steve's voice dropped even lower. "Marcus, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to tell me the truth. When was the last time you felt like your family saw you?" The question hit Marcus like a physical force. Shoulders dropped. His chin trembled. And the thing he had been holding inside, the thing he had been carrying through an entire year of silent isolation, through empty dorm rooms and skipped meals and phone calls cut short so nobody would hear the flatness in his voice, that thing rose up from wherever he had been keeping it and broke the surface. "I do not know," Marcus said. His voice was barely audible, but the microphone caught every syllable. "I do not think they do. I do not think they see me at all." Denise made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a mother makes when a blade passes through something she thought was protected. She took a step toward Marcus, but Steve gently held his position between them, not blocking her, creating space, giving Marcus the room to say what he had never said. "I am the easy one," Marcus continued, and now his voice was cracking, splitting open along fault lines that had been forming for years. "That is what they call me. Marcus is easy. Marcus does not need anything. Marcus is fine. They do not say it to be mean. They say it because they believe it, and I let them believe it because it was easier than asking for attention in a house where there was never enough to go around." He looked at his mother. "Mom, you plan everything, you organize everything, you take care of everything. But when was the last time you called me just to talk, not to check a box, not to make sure I was eating, just to ask me what I was thinking about, what I was reading, what I was feeling?" Denise's tears were falling, but Marcus was not finished. He looked at Terrence. "You are my brother. You are the person I have looked up to my entire life, and I cannot remember the last time you asked me a question about my life that was not part of a group text." Terrence's face crumpled. The golden child, the one who had always gotten it right, stood on that stage and realized that he had gotten something fundamentally wrong without ever knowing it. He looked at Brianna. "You understand what this feels like. I know you do, because you feel it too. We are the quiet ones, Bri, the ones who do not take up space. The difference is that you fight for your space. You push back. You make yourself heard even when it is hard. I stopped pushing. I just stopped." Brianna was crying so hard she could not respond. She reached for Marcus's hand and he let her take it. And in that small gesture between two siblings who understood what it meant to be overlooked in a family full of noise was a connection that had been waiting to happen for years. Robert moved. The steady, quiet father who expressed love through presence rather than words crossed the stage and stood directly in front of his youngest son. He did not speak immediately. He placed both of his hands on Marcus's shoulders and looked him in the eye, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who had just realized that his greatest strength, his ability to sit in silence, had blinded him to his son doing the same thing for entirely different reasons. "Marcus, I saw it," Robert said. "When you came home last Christmas, I saw it. Something was different, something was off, and I did not say anything. I told myself you were just tired. I told myself it was college stress. I told myself you would come to me if something was wrong." His voice broke. "I was wrong. I should have come to you. I am your father. It is not your job to come to me. It is my job to come to you, and I failed at that. And I am sorry, son. I am so sorry." Marcus fell into his father's arms. The boy who had not moved during the celebration, who had stood at the edge of his family's joy with his hands in his pockets and his heart in a locked room, collapsed into his father's chest and cried with the full-body release of someone who had been holding himself together for so long that letting go felt like falling apart. Robert held him. Denise wrapped herself around both of them. Terrence put his arms around all three. Brianna pressed herself into the circle. And for the first time in as long as Marcus could remember, he was in the center. Not at the edge, not at the end of the line, in the center. Steve Harvey stood a few feet away, watching this family reassemble itself around the person they had been missing without realizing he was missing. Tears were streaming down Steve's face. He let the moment exist for nearly 2 full minutes before he spoke. "I want to say something to every family watching this," Steve said, his voice raw and unsteady. "You think you know who needs you. You think it is the loud one or the struggling one or the one who asks for help. But sometimes the person who needs you most is the one who never asks, the one who never complains, the one you describe as easy because they have learned to need nothing from you rather than risk needing something and not getting it. That is not easy. That is lonely. And if you have someone in your family who is always fine, who never causes problems, who never demands attention, I am begging you, go check on them. Not with a text, not with a quick phone call. Go sit with them, look at them, ask them when the last time they felt seen was, and then be prepared for the answer, because it might break your heart, and it might also save theirs." The studio was still. Then the applause began. It started slowly, building from the front rows and rolling backward through the audience like a wave gathering force. Within seconds, every person in the building was on their feet. It was not applause for a game show moment. It was applause for recognition. 200 people who were thinking about someone in their own family. The quiet sibling. The easy child. The person at the edge of every family photo who was always smiling and never asked for anything and who they had not really looked at in months. maybe years, Steve turned to the family one final time. The Morrison family won $20,000 today, but the most valuable thing that happened on this stage was not the money. It was Marcus being seen, because when a family sees the person they have been missing, they do not just find that person. They find themselves. They find out who they are when everyone in the circle is accounted for. And that family, the complete one, the one with nobody standing at the edge, that is the family worth celebrating. When the episode aired 7 weeks later, the clip of Steve Harvey walking past the celebrating family to stand in front of Marcus was viewed over 90 million times in the first 2 weeks. It became the most discussed family feud moment of the year. But the discussion was not about drama or spectacle. It was about recognition. Clip had touched a nerve that ran through every family in every country where it was shared. The phenomenon of the invisible family member, the child or sibling or parent who was always present and never seen, was so universal that the response was unlike anything the show had ever experienced. Psychologists and family therapists embraced the moment immediately. The concept Steve had identified on stage, the easy child dynamic, was well documented in clinical literature under various names. Researchers had long understood that children who do not exhibit behavioral problems or academic struggles were often the ones who received the least parental attention, not because they were loved less, but because the household's emotional resources were allocated to the members who demanded them most loudly. The result was a pattern of self-erasure in which the quiet child learned to suppress their needs, minimize their presence, and equate being low maintenance with being loved. Steve Harvey had demonstrated this dynamic in real time on national television, and the clinical community recognized its significance immediately. Marcus entered therapy within 2 weeks of the taping. He later said in an interview that the family feud moment had been both the most terrifying and the most liberating experience of his life. "I did not plan to say any of that," he said. "I did not even know I was feeling it until Steve asked me. I thought I was just tired. I thought I was just going through a phase. But when he looked at me and said, 'When was the last time your family saw you?' the answer came out before I could stop it. And the truth is, I did not want to stop it. I had been invisible for so long that being seen, even like that, even in front of 200 strangers, felt like breathing after being underwater." Denise made changes. Significant, concrete, measurable changes. She instituted a weekly one-on-one phone call with each of her 3 children, not a group call, not a text. A dedicated conversation with each child individually where the only agenda was to listen. She told a reporter that the first call with Marcus lasted 2 hours and that she cried for most of it, not because what he said was devastating, but because she realized how much of her son's inner life she had simply never accessed. "I was so busy organizing my family's life that I forgot to participate in it," she said. "I knew what everyone needed logistically. I did not know what anyone needed emotionally, and the child I missed the most was the one who made it easiest to miss him." Robert started a ritual. Every Sunday evening, he called Marcus and said 5 words. "Tell me about your week." Not "how was your week," which could be answered with "fine." "Tell me about your week," which required detail and invited conversation. Marcus later said those calls were the thing that changed his relationship with his father. "My dad is not a talker. He never has been, but he is a listener. And once he started asking the right question, I discovered that he was the best listener I had ever met. I just had not given him anything to listen to because I assumed he was not interested. He was always interested. He just did not know how to show it. And I did not know how to ask for it." Terrence moved back to Indianapolis 6 months after the episode aired. He told his company he needed to work remotely, and he did not explain why. But his family knew why. He rented an apartment 15 minutes from his parents' house and began showing up for the small things. Marcus's Thursday evening study sessions at the campus library. Brianna's weekend shifts at the veterinary clinic, where Terrence would bring coffee and sit in the waiting room reading until she was done. Sunday dinners where he sat next to Marcus instead of across from him. He never made a speech about it. He never announced that he was changing. He just started being present in a way he had not been, and the effect on the family was like adding a missing instrument to an orchestra. The music did not change. It became complete. Brianna and Marcus grew closer than they had ever been. The bond between the 2 quiet siblings, the ones who understood what it felt like to stand at the edge, became the foundation of a relationship that both of them said they had needed for years, but had never known how to build. They started having lunch together every week, and those lunches became the space where both of them could say the things they did not say at family gatherings. Brianna later told a reporter, "Marcus and I spent our whole lives standing next to each other at the end of the line. We never thought to look sideways. We were both so busy being invisible that we did not realize we were invisible together. Steve Harvey showed us that, and now we are each other's most important person. The phrase, "check on your easy child," went viral. Parents across the country began posting about the children in their families who never caused problems and never asked for help, and who they were now realizing might need both. The conversation expanded beyond children to include any family member who had assumed the role of the low-maintenance one, the sibling who always said they were fine, the parent who never asked for anything, the friend who always showed up for others but never seemed to need anything in return. A family therapist in New York wrote an article that was shared over 2 million times in which she argued that Steve Harvey had identified one of the most pervasive and least discussed dynamics in modern family life: the assumption that silence equals contentment. It does not. Sometimes silence is just the sound a person makes when they have given up on being heard. Steve Harvey featured the Morrison family on his talk show 4 months after the episode. The family walked onto the set together, and the difference was visible from the first step. Marcus was not at the end of the line. He was in the middle between Denise and Robert, and both of his parents had a hand on him, not protectively but possessively, in the way that people hold something they almost lost and are determined never to lose again. Marcus looked different. He was not performing a smile. He was wearing one, a real one. The kind that uses the right muscles and reaches the right places. Steve asked Marcus how he was doing, and Marcus answered with a steadiness that surprised everyone. "I am doing better, Mr. Harvey. I started therapy. I started talking. I started telling my family what I need instead of assuming they should know. And they started listening, not because they did not care before, because I finally gave them something to hear." Steve nodded. Then he asked the question that the audience had been waiting for. "Marcus, the day I noticed you standing at the edge of your family's celebration, was that the first time someone really saw you?" Marcus thought about it for a long moment. Then he said, "No, it was not the first time someone saw me. It was the first time someone said it out loud. That is different. There is a difference between being seen and being told you are seen. A lot of people probably noticed that I was struggling, my professors, my roommate, my dad, but nobody said it. Nobody stopped what they were doing and said, 'I see you and you do not look okay.' You did that, Mr. Harvey, and the moment you said it out loud, the moment someone named it, I could not pretend it was not real anymore, and that is when everything started to change." Steve sat with those words for a long time. Then he addressed the cameras for the final time. "I have been on television for over 30 years. I have made a career out of being watched. But the most important thing I have ever done on television was not something I said. It was something I saw. I saw a boy standing at the edge of his family, and I named it. That is all I did. I named what I saw, and naming it gave that family the chance to fix it." He paused. "Every single person watching this has someone in their life who is standing at the edge, someone who is easy, someone who is fine. Someone who never asks for anything and never causes problems and is so quiet that you have stopped noticing the quiet. I'm asking you to notice. I'm asking you to walk over to that person and say, 'I see you.' Not because it will fix everything, but because it is the first step. And sometimes the first step is all a person needs to start walking back toward the people who love them." Marcus graduated from Indiana University the following spring. His entire family was there. Denise, Robert, Terrence, Brianna. They sat together in the auditorium, and when Marcus's name was called and he walked across the stage, every single Morrison was on their feet, cheering louder than anyone else in the building. Marcus later said it was the first time in his life that he felt like the center of his family's attention. Not because he had done something extraordinary, because he had been seen. And being seen, it turned out, was all he had ever wanted. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. Leave a comment below and tell us about the easy one in your family, the person who never asks for anything. Then go call them. Do not text, call, and when they answer, say 5 words, "Tell me about your week." We will see you in the next one.